Hi, nice to meet you. Would you like to introduce yourself for the camera and viewers?
Sure, sure. My name is Kristen DiGataldi. I am a paintings conservator by training, and that my current job title, I guess, is principal owner of DiGataldi Fine Art Restoration. So I am my own boss, but full disclaimer, I also collaborate a lot with my husband, who is also a paintings conservator. He works for the University of Delaware. He is a professor and teaches in the undergraduate program. So UD has
Mhm.
two programs. One is the undergraduate degree in art cons, and then the graduate program, which is probably more well known.
Yeah,
Uh, but interestingly, the undergraduate program predates the graduate program, which is a little
really?
known fact. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't even know that there was one over there. When I
Yeah.
was looking into colleges, I really didn't see any conservation
Sorry for the
undergrad.
baby in the background. You're
No,
going to
no
pick that up
worries.
on the mic. Okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't see a lot of undergraduate programs in conservation
There
here
aren't
in the
that
States.
many. There aren't that many, but UD has, I think, the oldest. I think they started in 1971, I think,
Oh
and the
wow, that's
graduate
amazing.
program started in 74. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, awesome. Good to know about that. But let's get into your career, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So
Uh,
everybody has a different story
mhm,
about how they arrived in at conservation. So mine, so my husband, he came at it from the fine arts background. He went to Art Institute of Chicago
mhm.
and was going to be a painter, and then found out that he didn't want to be a painter. And then I came at it from the opposite side. So I did chemistry first. So I have a chemistry bachelor's degree, and was also taking a lot of um, art classes on the side. I went to a liberal arts school in the middle of nowhere called Grinnell College,
Wait,
and
Grinnell in Iowa? I'm from
yes,
Iowa City. Half
okay,
of
well
my
there you
friends
go.
in high school go to Grinnell. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I went to Grinnell. I'm from California originally, so it was a big change. But I loved it there, and it was great because when I had the opportunity to go abroad, my college advisor, or my chemistry professor advisor at that time said, "Why don't you have enough credits? You're going to graduate fine. Why don't you just do something that you love? It doesn't have to be science, but it looks like you really like art and art history. So why don't you do something like?" So I did. I went and I did like a 2 for 1. I was in London for half the semester, and then Florence the other half, just doing art history. And I just that's where I kind of learned about conservation over there.
Mhm.
But I came back, finished my degree, and did some more research, and the internet was just starting to get more robust, and I found out about art conservation more in depth, doing some research, trying to find like intersections of art and science, like what I could do
Mhm.
with that. I tried to find pre-program experience, a place where I could intern
Mhm.
before so I did see that there were graduate programs. I thought that's clearly what I should do. But as the same was true then, if not more so, I would say, uh, even though I, it is highly competitive still to this day to get
Mhm.
into graduate programs. We had to do a lot more things, like additional testing. There was a science test to get in. So stuff like that they've done away with, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in any case, the prerequisite list was long and lengthy,
Yeah.
and you also had to do a pre-program internship,
Mhm.
which is a catch 22 situation,
Yeah.
same as now. It is impossible
Yeah.
to find them, and good luck if you find one that's paid. It's amazing. So, but back then it was even worse for somebody that like me that had a science degree. It's completely flipped now.
Yeah.
So I knocked on the doors of a number of institutions, and they didn't want me. They're like, "Why are you here? You have a bachelor's in chemistry. We can't use you." And they weren't mean about it, but they just said
Mhm.
no thank you.
Yeah.
So I said, "Okay." That would be completely the opposite today. So I took out loans and I did a post-bac program for a year in Florence, working doing classes there. It's a program that unfortunately since has folded, called Saatchi, Studio Arts Centers International.
Hmm.
I think they folded more or less. COVID was the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
But I was able to do that, and through that program, we also had most of our professors were Italian. So I met a fourth generation paintings restorer through that program. He taught one of our fresco restoration classes, and then I decided. So he took a few of us under his wing, the ones that he could actually work, that could get work done in the studio. So we had one girl that he hired she was very tall, she had long arms, and she was really good at doing structural work. And then I was hired to do in painting or retouching. And then another girl was hired. She was very, I don't know, she kind of did like administrative stuff. Her Italian was pretty good.
Gotcha.
So he had three of us, and he would take, every semester, every year, he would take different a few students, and he would pay us under the table. But I was there legally, passed my visa, and was not really. So I stayed with him for about a year, and I wasn't really. I mean, it was great. The work was amazing. I got to touch amazing things, but we're working in a modified condo flat. And the studio was wonderful, but there was I had such a research analytical mind already, research driven. That was very much in me from my science. So I decided that, it was great to do that, but I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I decided to leave and come back to the States, which was a risk because, again, I didn't know but I was able to get, I had a few more classes to take, studio art classes, and I was able to get an internship at RISD Museum up in Rhode Island. So doing objects and frames, actually. So the bulk of my pre-program experience I think it was actually half objects and half paintings. And I tried that. I guess after a year went by, I then tried to apply to the programs. I had no interest in going to NYU, so I didn't apply. And then I applied to Buffalo and Winterthur, the UD Winterthur program. And Buffalo said, sorry, no, thank you. So I didn't get an interview, which is normal. It is normal to not get interviews the first time you apply.
Thank you. That's good to hear as a senior.
Yeah, absolutely. You should expect it, but it's good to get your name in for that first year, even if you have to at least fulfill the prerequisites. But even if you are pretty sure you're, just if you're taking classes at the time you're applying, and then you will have satisfied the prereq, apply. That's the position I was in. So I applied, and I got an interview at Winterthur. I don't know how, but I did. And I was just jumping for joy at that because that was totally unexpected, and I just went there and had fun with it because I knew that I wasn't going to get it. So I did the interview process, and I got waitlisted. But then serendipitously, the UCLA program began that year.
Oh, wow.
There was a woman in front of me that got in, and she decided to go to the UCLA program instead. So I just barely in there and got in. I probably, looking back, could have may have benefited. It's a pro and con kind of thing. Like, how long do you want to wait before you get into school? I could have probably benefited from it, but I had enough hands-on experience already at that point, because Saatchi, they really just plunge you as soon as you show up. You get projects. You start treating things right away. There's no leading up to.
That is both amazing and terrifying.
Yeah, that's right. So I had enough, and then working in a studio, like a real functioning private studio, that we had to get things out the door, and then working in a small museum, just to deal with things on a daily basis there. But I probably could have used a little bit more hands-on, but I was pretty good at that point in terms of getting hands-on experience done. But I don't know, it wouldn't have hurt me to take a couple more classes here and there, probably, especially in our history.
Yeah.
But in any case, I graduated in 2008, and during the program, I had internships in the Getty, the Rice Museum, and the National Gallery of Art. Um, and I stayed at the National Gallery of Art after my third year was done, and I completed a fellowship. So I stayed there, which is not normal. Usually, you move around constantly
Yeah.
in this field, and I had already moved around quite a bit. So I was just jumping up and down for joy when I learned that I didn't have to move again. So I was able to stay after my third year internship
Hmm.
another 3 additional years. So I was able to
Oh,
stay in
wow.
one location for 4 years. I then decided, so I graduated, I got my master's in 2008, and then I came back to get my PhD after my fellowship was done at U of D again, because my husband had a job here, and I wanted to continue the research that I began at the National Gallery as a fellow and finish it. And so I got that PhD in 2016, 17. Um, and then, but I started working on I started my own private business, I guess, when I was in DC, when I was there. So I've been doing private work ever since then. And then, uh, my business is pretty much, my clients range from museums to galleries to private collectors to the sweet little grandma who lives down the street in the neighborhood. It's pretty much anybody. And there are a number of art warehouses now
Hmm.
in this tiny state of Delaware for tax reasons. A lot of high profile collections and collectors are storing their stuff here because they don't pay
Yeah.
tax on it. So there is definitely a need. And I would say, if a paper conservator wanted to open shop in the area, one just retired. So now the only other paper conservator I know is in Philly, and she's swamped. She has
Wow.
like a year backlog.
I,
So
yeah.
there's a lot of work to be had here. It's growing. All of these art warehouses are running out of room, and they're expanding because there's too much stuff coming in. So it's very interesting time right now. I would say it really took off during COVID. It's been a
Hmm.
slow kind of growth before
Yeah.
then, but then during COVID, the rich got richer. They got a little bit more bored, and they started buying things in a
Yeah.
cheap way. And also, I think concurrently, museums had to revisit their budgets. And
Like that.
major museums, for example, ones that you and I both know, big name museums that are up in New York,
Hmm.
have had to kind of look at the cost that they have having to shell out, for storage up in New York. Is
Yeah.
that feasible? Can they still, is there a way to save money? And I would say a number of them are now realizing they can save money by just storing things 2.5 hours away down in Delaware versus in Manhattan proper, where you're
Cool.
going to be
Yes.
paying a lot more to store your works of art. So, yeah, it's been an interesting, I guess, last 5 years for sure.
I mean, it's great for you, I guess. Lots of work.
Yeah, there's a lot of work. Hmm.
What would you say, like, the main? I mean, I'm sure there's just a huge difference between working like for a conservation group or company or whatever versus running your own business. I guess
Um,
what are your like your favorite differences? The hardest?
I mean, so that's a good question. I thought you were going to ask me about difference between working in a museum and private, which we can talk about. Um,
Too.
yeah, that's a good question. So the pros and cons of me being my own boss. I have to do all the invoicing. I have to do all the paperwork. I have to do all the photography. I have to do all the reports. I have to do all the emailing. I have to do all the phone calls. I don't have a secretary to do all that. I don't
Gotcha.
have an
So
assistant.
all the normal downsides of running your own
Yeah,
business.
so I have to do all that, and I have to do the job.
Yeah.
So, but I also, my clients know me pretty well. They know they can trust that I can get the job done on time and I can do it well. So that's allowed me to, strangely enough, compete with the New York scene. So, I can charge. I'm not going to be charging as much as conservators up
Yeah.
in New York. I don't have that kind of. I don't have to deal with a $3,000 a month rent bill, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like just like New York City expenses, and I don't
Mhm.
have to deal with overhead costs with a big company in New York. I can't imagine. That's
Yeah.
no fun. So, however, I can still compete enough with them to the point where my prices are not as high, but I can raise them higher than I normally would otherwise, just being little me in Delaware, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So, but I say I can charge a decent amount, but I still have to do all of the work,
Yeah.
basically. So, and I can decide. So another good thing about my situation is that I can decide if I want to work for somebody or not. I don't have
Oh,
to.
yeah.
There are annoying clients out there you don't want to work for. And when you're first starting out, you take everything. You take
Yeah.
everything and you work for people that you don't want to, or galleries that are just horrible. And now more and more I can say no thanks. Here's a referral list. And I don't do that very much. I don't do that
Yeah.
very much. But
What
but they're
are there's like something that would, I mean, obviously if someone's rude or awful, you don't want them,
yeah,
but
there's
like, is
been
there something that you
and a lot of these places that are annoying are known bad actors. They're known bad
Mhm.
actors, and they get passed. It's too bad, but they become predatory, especially on the new uprising. I was one of them, one of many rising people are just starting their career, so they price gouge them, they haggle them down
Yeah.
when they're raking in tons of money, and like they
Mhm.
just penny pinch you. And then especially galleries that are not careful, they are trying to make a profit, trying to turn a buck, and so they send their pieces out on the road constantly to showcase them. That's a way to you get eyes on your
Mhm.
paintings. Also, if you can promote them and show them in an exhibition,
Yeah.
it you can raise the price, for to sell a piece. So so you got to get these things ready for exhibition. If they're dinged up a little bit, scratches, little holes, punctures, whatever, tears, they need backing boards, whatever.
Mhm.
There's a wrinkle in the canvas you have to get. So there's things that you come in and you do, and you help the galleries get their ducks in a row, and then they send pieces out, and then comes back, and then there's new damage on it because they're not spending the money on good art handlers
Yeah.
or taking the time to actually care for the artwork. They just want to make a buck. So those are and then it comes back, there's damage, and you're like, wow, really?
Yeah.
I
Why
just
would I take this job?
yeah.
You're gonna ruin
And
the work.
sometimes they'll gaslight you and they'll be like, well, I think you missed that's when you use your trusty camera and you say, well, I have a high resolution photograph and that damage was not in there. Not in my before treatment picture. Just stuff like that. I mean,
Mhm.
people will pull fast things all the time, just to penny pinch. So, but there, those people are out there. But this is true, I think, of any business
Yeah.
that, for any business, if you own your own business, as you go along in life, if you do well, you can start to drop obnoxious clients. That's a good thing, um,
Yeah.
because you don't need to deal with them as much anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a nice bonus.
Mhm.
Great. Let's see. That. Oh yeah, if we want to get into some specifics, would you do like a couple of projects that you've worked on in the past? Anything particularly interesting you'd like to like share as like a case study for the type of stuff you work on?
Okay. There's been a lot. There was a project that I worked on for a couple years up in Media, Pennsylvania. So it's at Villanova University. It's a
Hmm.
giant painting that was just falling apart. It was attributed to Circle of Pietro da Cortona, who was a well-known Roman painter,
Hmm.
um, 17th century. So but attribution was not confirmed. So the painting had everything wrong with it. It had been restored poorly, times five. It was flaking. It had bulges in the canvas. It had been 70% overpainted. It was filthy, covered in discolored varnish and surface grime, and large areas were like were covered with animal glue that had discolored as well. And then it also what's another thing I was going to say? Yeah, so it had all of these issues. It took about 2 years to work on, and we had an interdisciplinary team up there. So there was an art historian, there was an art history teacher that was involved, and then we had the science department who was very enthusiastic at the time, and we were able to they had a portable XRF, and so the students were able to work with us. We got to do pigment analysis. I was also able to use resources back at the University of Delaware because I was also at that time getting my PhD while I was doing this project, which was probably not the smartest thing, but I did. And that was a great project because we flew in, we got funding to fly in X-ray techs because this painting was 16 feet high and 20 feet long. So it was very long. Yeah, it was big. So we couldn't move it. And so we flew these guys in who their normal job was to X-ray airplane fuselage, and also like the understructure of the foundations of buildings to look for cracks. And so they would do they would have to take their X-ray plate on the road literally and have to move it around. So we jerry-rigged a system to X-ray this thing with them took about 2.5 days. And we're able to find some really cool changes underneath. Yeah, and we also had another team from Washington and Lee come in, and they did the infrared imaging. So that project was really cool because we had so many moving parts and so many people come and help. And then we also got funding in the end because there was a very large section in the bottom right. And when I say it was as big as a large or as a small child, it was literally that big because it was of a small child. It was a mother and child embracing, and the child was essentially gone except for the head and part of a hand. So I had to fill in this area that was huge, and I didn't know it was supposed to go there, and it could have been anything. So we got additional funding to go to Rome and take high resolution photos of a lot of his frescoes and paintings that are there. And we were able to find comparable, because, these are workshops. So there are a lot of painting, like figures that may be in a certain pose that may be repeated in other areas, in other workshops.
Multiple students.
Yeah. So I was able to find something that looked pretty good. And I just was able to use that as a reference to kind of paint that area back again. But, of course, it's all documented. So, people be like, wow, that's a huge area for you to just invent. And it's true. It is. But you can't leave a gaping hole. It was probably 3 by 4 feet. So it was big. And you can't leave a hole like that on an easel painting. You just can't. It ruins it. So something had to go there. And it's all fully documented. If somebody doesn't like it, in 50 years, they can take off my work in like a matter of 30 minutes because our materials are highly reversible and they can do another better version. But that was really a cool experience to go there and actually see his paintings and the work, his and related students' works. That was really cool.
That's great. Yeah. You mentioned that most of the painting had already been overpainted. Was that recent enough that the materials used were easily removable, or was it an issue to try and remove the old overpainting?
Yes and no. So this painting has a World War II story too. So it was last restored in the 50s. No. It was last restored in the 70s. So that stuff was able to be removed pretty easily. Then there were 2 other campaigns of overpaint after that. And I would say the youngest, like the earliest, was quite tenacious and difficult, and we didn't remove all of it. And in that case, you just tone over it. As long as the texture is okay. But so this painting had miraculously, so it had been in a castle in a small village, which we went to. It was about an hour outside of Rome. And this castle had been it was taken over by the Nazis. So it was very crazy story. So this woman, American woman, at the time so after World War One, Italy wasn't doing very well. Okay,
Yes,
financially, right?
it was not.
So there were a number of Italians that had titles and like were from elite nobility, whatever, and they were prince this or they still had people back
Yeah.
then that were called yes, and so then you had new money in America, and some of that new money found the old, these old lines of elite nobility in Europe, and they would marry.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with this painting. The owner, so it lived in this castle outside of Rome, and this woman, American woman who had a ton of money. She was older than the prince that she married, but it didn't matter. His family wasn't that thrilled, but what she loved Italy. She married him. He died like a few years after of cancer or something, of some illness.
No.
Yeah, yeah. And so she inherited all of his stuff. He had a castle there, and it
You
was
got a
full of
pretty
art.
good deal out of
I
that.
know, I know. It was full of art, but she was a good steward. She wanted to actually make an American center there for like students to come and learn about art history.
Oh wow. Well,
But then World War II.
for the next 2
Yeah,
decades,
yeah.
that would have been great.
Unfortunately, World War II happened and it put the
Yeah.
kibosh on that. And so she had to smuggle a bunch of stuff. So the Nazis were coming. She knew they were coming. It was that castle actually served as like the headquarters for the German Air Force for like a number of months. Anyways, so she knew that they would ransack the place. So she smuggled like a couple of huge bins of stuff to the States. And this painting, which was massive, was in it. So I believe it was probably rolled.
Mhm.
We didn't find roll mark like damage related to roll marks, but yeah, in any case, it may not have been. I don't know. But it had been lined before, and it was an Italian lining. I could tell. It's old lining. So it had been restored. It was in a castle that was not climate controlled. So it had already been restored a couple times over since it was moved into that castle.
Mhm.
And then it was restored again when it got here in the States a number of years later. So
Yeah.
like I said, in the 60s or 70s. And then, we showed up in 2000 and it was like 2011 or so. Yeah.
Wow. That's an amazing history.
Yeah. It was a lot of work.
Let's see. We talked a little bit about, I guess we talked about the challenges of working for yourself. What do you think, like, some of the biggest challenges that art conservators face in their work today? I mean, obviously there's a lot depending on what type of work do you do. I guess what do you find the most challenging or exciting about art conservation work?
So challenging for okay, I can just speak to my specialties. So everyone you're going to talk to is going to give you a different answer. There are hot button issues right now like sustainability.
Yeah.
And DEI increasing because we're very white female, heavily white female fields right now. We can talk about why that is. And so a lot of people, and disaster recovery used to be a lot more of a hot button topic than it is now. I don't know why that's like it's not as in fashion. I have found as I get older and more like a curmudgeon that a lot of these things are a lot of people tend to just our conferences have become way less. All these issues are very important, but they have taken over the field such that to the point where nobody is really teaching the students hands-on work anymore. So the students are being told more and more to that preventive conservation is really important, and it is. but they're kind of being told that it's the only thing. So, for example, I have clients out the wazoo that just out the ears that just are begging me for, do you know a paper conserver? Do you know a furniture conserver? Do you know this? Or we have the, and I can't help them, but I'm literally down the street from one of the top graduates, one of the top graduate programs in North America. So I I can't give them students. I can't give them people, recent graduates, even that have the skill set anymore to be able to handle just day to day practical things. So, challenges for the field, I see they're becoming a real big problem with us being able to the um, supply the industry with people that actually have hand skills anymore.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so I'm not sure I'm not sure what to do about that. By Rubens, that's really beautiful. And right now I'm also working on a huge project. It's a 20-foot high, 60-foot long mural painting by NC Wyeth that is huge. And that's rewarding in its own way, but also giant and very it it comes with big issues.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine. But those two types of projects are very different.
Yeah.
I approach them very differently. One of them, I'm reaching out to art historians in Europe, like Rubens, to try to figure out how to best. There's a big crack right through the face of one of the figures, and I am trying to do my best to do research on how to reconstruct the face. This is a well-known painting by him, and I get to say that it's by him because it's been it's in the catalog raisonné it will be, or it has been in the catalog raisonné for the Rubens' work. And a number of scholars have looked at this painting, and for reasons I won't get into here, they know it's by him, which is a rare situation. It's a rare instance because his work
Really
was
exciting.
huge, and there's so many School of Rubens, workshop of
Yeah.
Rubens. It's unbelievable. But there are aspects of this painting that they're pretty sure that he at least had a hand in most of it. So it was copied. It was basically he did this painting and then he had his minions in the workshop do copies for the market. So I can sort of look to some of these copies and figure out which ones are better quality and which ones I can pull from. And I've been having the art historians kind of guide me there. So that's another thing. If you work in private practice, you don't have an art historian just floating around the building like you do.
You have to reach out.
But it doesn't. But that used to matter more back in the day. But now with the internet, all you have to do is send somebody a picture, say, I have this painting, and more likely than not, the art historians are very excited to talk to you.
Yeah.
So, because this is their world. So I feel like back in the day, it was a lot more, people can complain of it's lonely when you're in private practice. I like the solitude personally. I don't know what that says about me. But I do. But then I have the option of reaching out to specialists whenever I want, and it's often it's a very nice, exchange. It usually results in a very nice exchange. And then with the NC Wyeth, I'm having to deal with. So Jamie Wyeth is NC Wyeth's grandson. He's also an artist. He's alive, and he's going to be a steward of this painting for the rest of his years. He's up there. He's in his 70s. But when he's building a structure for this mural right now, for this mural to live in, and, we're having to deal with HVAC contractors, architects, lighting specialists, riggers for installation. I mean, it's everything. And you learn a lot when you deal with projects like that. You have to be very patient, to talk with all these people, because we can't. I think in private practice, there's more demands of you to be more forgiving and flexible and patient and willing to talk to people from all sectors, from all different fields, and from all different walks of life. You have to be that way, otherwise you won't make it in private practice. In
Mhm.
museum sector, you will find that's where, and I used to be one of them, and I used to float among them. You tend to find the more eccentric, drama queen, uh, and prim and proper esque painting conservator at their easel, and they don't want to really talk to you. They don't really want to interact. They just want to work on their project, and then go to coffee and tea, and then maybe go to a little concert after the museum gets out. That that's the difference. I lived in that world for many years. It was quite lovely, but I had enough of it. I had my fill.
Mhm.
It got kind of quite boring for me, honestly. Um, and I found it a lot more rewarding and exciting to tackle bigger challenges, real life challenges. Not saying that my colleagues' museums don't have real life challenges. They do, but they're different. They're different.
Yeah, well, the structures are already there too. They're already in
Yeah,
communication with everyone.
and a lot of these paintings in the museums, they're not coming to you in dire straits. They've
Mhm.
usually been restored like 10 times already by the,
Yeah.
but it's like little things. It's more aesthetic problems. They might be dirty varnish, or in painting on the picture has turned. It's
Yeah.
discolored, and those are real problems. But it's not coming to you with tears and actively flaking or folded up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a different mindset, I think. But so they're very different worlds. But those are just two snapshots, big
Mhm.
projects right now that I have going on that are good. I would say that they're both exciting, but for different reasons.
Yeah, no, those are great to hear about. Thank you. Let's see. I think we covered like most of the questions that I sent you. Oh, I guess especially with you having your background in chemistry, how I mean, there's obviously just been like huge advancements in the scientific technology used in everything, not just art conservation, over the past like 20 years. Do you still do a lot of the like scientific analysis, chemical analysis yourself? Do you not do that as much anymore?
Not as much anymore, but I was heavily into this for obvious reasons because I have
Hmm.
my first degree was chemistry, and I continued that. I love, I still love doing technical analysis of pictures, and I'm I'm I don't get braggadocious hardly ever, but I'm pretty good at it just because I've been at it for a number of years,
Yeah.
and I know, and I had the privilege of working in an institution with very good conservation scientists, so I know the right questions to ask,
Hmm.
and what the instruments can do and what they can't do. That last part is really important because see all of these articles now, all of this clickbait stuff. Oh, we found this with this particle accelerator out in like Paris, and it's not amazing. And it's great, but I in my lifetime with the advent of like advancements in technology, we have totally gone. It's sort of like what the internet has done to our society as a whole, like conservation science. So it went from scientists having to literally like mark out peaks by hand from
Hmm.
chromatograph, like in the 60s and 70s, like in the National Gallery in London, to now we just feed these instruments a tiny sample and they just spit stuff out at us.
Yeah.
Very automated. So going from that to that is a lot of stuff got lost in translation there in the middle. And that's kind of what my dissertation was about. It was about the evolution of conservation science as it
Hmm.
pertains to binding media analysis and paintings. Like, how do we know it's egg tempera? How do we know
Yeah.
it's oil? Do we really know these things? And I mean, so what I found is that the instruments are only as good as the questions you ask of them.
Hmm.
We have this horrible like blind faith, and the conservation scientists are honestly the good ones will know that you
Hmm.
have to be wary of trusting the instruments too
Yeah.
much. And there's only a few of the good ones out there. Many of them have their babies, which is
Hmm.
like go into there's a PI, principal investigator for like a given, and they have their grants they got to keep, they got to maintain, and then they have their babies, which they may be a ramen spectroscopist, and so they love ramen, and they want you to
Yeah.
only use the ramen. Even though this question that you're coming to them with cannot be answered by ramen, you know, like, so you have to be able to navigate which instruments are going to, and often it's definitely more than one. You need more than one. There's
Yeah.
no such thing as being able to answer everything with one instrument. Even two is pushing it. At best, you use like four.
Yeah.
And I know that we want to try to do things as non-destructive as possible, but honestly, sometimes the best info is collected from a tiny cross section. But like that, if there's anything you can do, take a cross section, and that will answer a lot. You can see what kind of varnish layers you're dealing with. You can see overpaint. You can see ground. If there's interlayer cleavage, if like paint is flaking from the ground,
Yeah.
you can see that. Or if the ground is flaking off the canvas, you can sometimes see that. So you know, non-destructive is great, but it doesn't answer most things, especially when it relates to treatment. You kind of have to take scrapings from the surface to see what kind of surface coating you have, or a cross section. And
Yeah.
I'm of course only talking about paintings. It gets complicated. I think, especially with objects, it gets very
Yeah.
complicated, and I can't speak to that. But I would say we're getting now. I see we're getting way too ahead of ourselves. In that the conservation scientists still think that our world is very easy because it's art. Art should be easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to just, I mean, it's a painting. How hard can it be? And then we start giving them samples, and then they realize. And then sometimes you never hear from that professor again that wanted to do some fancy project with their fancy instrument. That has happened to me many times. But the converse is true in that sometimes the scientists will just take the samples and run with them and make all of these pronouncements because their instrument is detecting all this stuff. But our instruments are now so specialized and so sensitive that if you sneeze on the painting, you will find protein. Like it's just like we don't, these paintings, especially you're talking about a 500-year-old painting. I just told you the history of this big giant Cortona painting. It's been restored 80 times over.
Yeah.
And that's normal for a lot of these European paintings. And the scientists don't always get that. And they don't realize that these things have been subjected to multiple campaigns involving heat, moisture, and what are like the building blocks of most chemical reactions? Heat and moisture. Like any reaction that you need needs those two things at least. And then if you throw a bunch of other reactive things like pigments in there, like you're going to get a range
pigments full of heavy metals and
right. And so it gets very complicated, and you have to know a lot about pigment manufacturing and how the stratigraphy of painting, what that artist would have used. And the scientists don't know that always. So I find that even some of the conservation scientists, like they've never painted in their life. They don't know about reconstructing things. And that's something that my husband and I really have loved to do in our past. I would advise you afterwards to go to the Crest Technical Art History website at U of D and just hang out on there, because there are actual reconstructions that we made. And then there's digital ones too. And it walks you through step by step on how some of these European paintings were made.
Oh, that's amazing. I'll definitely check that.
There's also an analysis section that walks you through, how do you use X-ray on painting? How do you use UV? Why do we care? So we have interacted so much with conservation scientists and students that we made this website for the general public, just because we're like tired of answering emails about the program, which is fine. It's fine, but it's all there. And if people have questions about stuff, we just send them there.
That's amazing. I'll check it.
Yeah, so I don't know. Conservation science, there's really cool thing. I still will do technical analysis of paintings, but in my day-to-day operation, no, I don't need to. I know enough about how these materials work. I can do solvent tests. I know what kind of varnish it is most of the time. So you get to a point in your career where you don't really need it as much. It's very fun and useful and a good exercise to do in grad school when you're learning about how these instruments work, and also what is going on your painting, and how are you gonna navigate cleaning. That all students should do that. But for me, day-to-day operations, I don't need to do that anymore.
Fair enough. Well, great. I think we're getting to the end of how long I told you this would take, and we've pretty much gone through all the questions I sent you in some way or another. So I think my final thing to leave off with, is there anything left that you'd like to share? And if not, do you have any advice or any final words to anyone interested in conservation, or either professionally or just for fun?
It's definitely a labor of love. So you don't go into this profession expecting to make tons of money, although it's possible. I would say now that I've lived through 3 recessions and a pandemic, everyone is being steered, a lot of these students are being steered towards the museum sector, and that's okay, except when COVID happens and all museums close and they furlough everybody and axe half the jobs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and we saw this happen also in 2008, and that's right when I got out of grad school. So I had the good fortune of being able to stay in school after
Yeah.
that PhD, which was again fully funded. That's another thing they don't always advertise, is that the graduate programs, Buffalo, so Winterthur is fully funded. So that means your tuition, yes, and board is covered, and you get a stipend that you can live off of in Delaware. That's why it's so competitive. One of the reasons. And then Buffalo is mostly funded, not completely, but mostly. NYU, I think it's a case by case basis, so it depends on the student. But so there is that, which is great to have that. I had the added bonus of being able to get a PhD that was also fully funded, and I was like, why not? I mean, when does that ever come along? So, but for students that are thinking about pursuing a career, I would say, even if you see yourself being in a museum for the rest of your life, treating amazing things, that's fine, but that might not be your reality. So do yourself a favor and at least try to pick up enough skills and ask enough questions in grad school, because the grad schools are now being forced to do more of these seminars that talk about private practice. Yeah. Because of the demands of students and postgrads that have told the schools they need to educate the students more on this and how to navigate the world that I'm in. So I would tell students to, even if you're not sure that you want to go into private practice, still try to pick up enough skills and knowledge and network with people in the private sector, so that if you have to go into private practice, like if the world is looking like it's ending, you have a cushion. Yeah. You already have a few clients where you can kind of scrape by. And it's also, I have to say, the museums don't pay great. They're getting better. But they don't pay great. I would say if there's money to be had, it is most certainly in the private sector. Yeah. And this matters when you want to someday maybe buy a house and buy a new car and buy all these things. It is not always possible to do that on $70,000 a year living in the Bay Area. I don't even think that they're offering that much. It's like the last one I saw was 65. Yeah. That's really hard. So we're making a big stink about it. A small number of us, that the museums need to be better, especially if they want to improve their diversity. They diversify their applicant pool. They need to actually pay livable wages. Yeah. So these things actually are connected. So where I would say get your feet wet as soon as possible with getting your hands dirty, get into treatment, because and keep that skill set up, because it could prove to serve you really well. You might like private practice, and a lot of conservators do both. They work in a museum either full-time or part-time, and they supplement their income with private projects on the side, and that can be really great. That's a great setup. And that way you can have the best of both worlds. And I think we should be steering more students towards that. And then if they don't like private practice, they can drop it. Or if they don't like the museum sector, they could drop it and go 100% private. We need to be a little bit more, and the schools will do that, but you have to, as a student, be a little bit proactive about telling them that you want to have.
They're not presenting both options unbiased usually.
But they're starting to be a bit better about listening. So that's my advice.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really amazing to talk to you, and really great. You've had some really helpful things as someone who's graduating soon and starting to look into graduate school.
A lot to think about.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much.